these are the problems we have to solve. And the way we solve it is to help more people flourish and help more people to contribute in their community. And so we've got to be laser-like focused at Stand Together on creative solutions to these really tough problems. And in doing so, involving as many people as possible in that work.
You're listening to the Real Returns podcast, where we learn how real investments can make a real impact. Join your hosts, Andrew and Dan, as they share stories and interview business leaders on how real estate and other forms of investment can create meaningful change for individuals and communities around the world.
Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Real Returns podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Reichert. I've got my co-host, Dan Croce. Dan, what's happening over there today?
Andrew, I'm not going to lie, I'm doing really well. I'm in a great mood today. I'm in a great mood.
Sound like it.
The sun's shining. Two reasons I'm in a great mood. First of all, we get to interview none other than Mr. Evan Feinberg, who is a friend of mine and actually someone that I've looked up to as a mentor at different times in my life. So I'm really looking forward to that. But also, it is May 1st, which is May Day. And my family has a tradition on May Day. We go around the neighborhood and we bring flowers to our neighbors, which is something of a European, like a Dutch tradition, I think, that my wife grew up doing. So watch out. Your porch might be invaded in a couple hours. But
I always get a little scared when Croces show up at my house. Never really know what to think, but
that's
if you're bringing flowers,
that's
it
legit.
Sounds like it might be okay.
But I did, it made me think I had a question for you today, which was, do you know if April showers bring May flowers, what did the May flowers bring? Do you know?
Pilgrims?
Pilgrims. You got it. May flowers bring pilgrims.
I remember that, I think, from elementary school. They taught me something about that. Nina, Santa Maria, wasn't there something?
The Nina, the Pinta, yeah, something like that.
I don't know.
It's
what do I know?
A Thanksgiving joke, right?
There you go.
Anyway, yeah, so doing well and excited for today's show.
Cool. Well, I'm super excited too. I got to meet Evan in DC at his home base. We were just talking about this. I mean, it must have been like 10 years ago or something. So
yeah.
Evan's amazing. He's doing incredible work. So Evan is the SVP over there at Stand Together. Stand Together is doing some amazing work. He's leading their efforts to apply and integrate the principles that promote human flourishing and really help their partners to do the same. And he's also the chairman of the Stand Together Foundation. So that's their dedicated effort to break the cycle of poverty and really transform communities. So Evan, thanks so much for being on the show. Would you mind just introducing yourself, telling a little bit about your story and how you got into doing what you're doing today?
Man, Andrew and Dan, it is great to be with you. You know, I have known Dan for a whole long time, and I've always really looked up to him. His dad jokes being really the primary thing that I've really learned from him and tried to emulate with my three boys.
It's what I bring to the world, Evan. So
yes, there you go. No,
unique ability.
Really, really excited because I love what you guys are doing and love the opportunity to talk about these important topics with your audience and listeners. And so I'm happy to share my story. I was born and raised in the great city of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and I met Dan at Grove City College, where I really developed a worldview around human flourishing, what drives human flourishing. And that's really been my North Star ever since. What are the ideas and principles that, when applied, can really help people to live up to their full potential? And so that led me first into the world of public policy. I worked on Capitol Hill for a number of years for a couple different senators. I ran for office myself in a quixotic bid that did not succeed. And when I was trying to figure out, well, how might I really pursue that North Star, that's when I found Stand Together a little over 12 years ago now, or about 12 years ago, I should say, and really have been helping to develop within that philanthropic community. It's a group of hundreds of the most successful business leaders in the country that come together to drive social change that believes in people and empowers them from the bottom up. And so I've been helping to stand up and build the effort to do that in communities, to help particularly the most vulnerable to tap into their gifts and talents to contribute and flourish, and then really draw out those ideas and the lessons that we can learn from that and apply it much more broadly. So yeah, that's my story.
Awesome. Thank you, Evan. Can you give us just a quick overview of the work of Stand Together itself? I mean, you in a sense just did that, but maybe just go a little bit deeper, tell us what is the mission, how does that play itself out, and maybe help us draw the distinction between Stand Together and the Stand Together Foundation.
Yeah. So Stand Together is this incredible group of business leaders, philanthropists, social entrepreneurs, people that really want to drive change and human flourishing in the world. And those business leaders come together in common cause to drive a shared strategy that can really move the needle. That's the country's most significant business leaders tackling our country's biggest problems. But they're not just solving problems. The goal is to do so in a way that will drive social change, which is to say, we want to change the culture. We want to change the beliefs that people have about themselves, that they have about others. And so that the work that we do doesn't just improve education or healthcare or help to strengthen communities to alleviate poverty, but in doing so, it drives sort of fundamental change where we see each other differently, we see the world differently, and that we can all sort of engage independently along the way to really empower one another to be the best version of ourselves. And so that community, founded by Charles Koch, really incredible business leaders, built some of the most significant businesses in America. And they engage in everything from some of the issues I just mentioned. What would it look like to transform our standardized top-down education system in America and see a world in which every single kid has an individualized educational path to discover their aptitudes, develop them, and realize their potential? What would it look like to have a healthcare system that looks the same, to have communities that people aren't sort of pointing at other people to blame them for their problems? They're not looking for powerful people to come in and solve problems. They look within themselves. They say, how do I help improve the lives of my neighbors? What can I do to improve the lives of others, to improve my community, with a contribution mindset? And so we sort of apply those ideas across a whole bunch of things. And in my experience, I was able to sort of stand up the work to do that through community-based philanthropy and some of our impact investing work in communities, to see if we can just go ahead and apply those principles in ways that don't just say manage the symptoms of poverty or homelessness or addiction, and instead help people to truly thrive. And we've been doing that ever since.
Wow. That's inspiring, and it is definitely thought-provoking. It makes me wonder, how do you decide, it's a big world, it's a big country with a lot of issues, a lot of problems. How does Stand Together sort of prioritize where it wants to apply energy to move the needle for the issues that it believes are the most pressing for society?
Yeah. Well, at Stand Together, we really believe that ideas make the world go around. And so everything we do, we ask the degree to which engaging in those strategies, will they reshape the paradigms that people have about people and problems? So as to say, when we're successful with the investment of helping those that are overcoming incarceration or addiction, homelessness, whatever it might be, when we're successful, will it have this follow-on effect that people won't be able to see the problem through the same lens that they had before? Because we think fundamentally the problem in society, the reason why we have 40 million Americans experiencing poverty, 20 million at least struggling with addiction, another 20 million that are in recovery and struggling with in that portion of their addiction. Social and economic mobility on the decline for one of the first times in American history. Record levels of loneliness, despair, polarization, toxicity in our communities. When we look at all those problems, we think that the reason why those things fester is because people are trying to solve those problems with the wrong paradigm. And there's, different flavors of it. But essentially, we all fall into the trap of what we would think of as top-down control, seeing people as broken and deficient and in need of top-down expert help, seeing expert-driven, evidence-based solutions as the answer rather than social entrepreneurship and discovery, viewing sort of experts rather than those closest to the problem as having the best answers. And so if we can flip the script away from that top-down control and toward a deep belief in people as individuals, as each and every person having a gift to contribute. And our role is to remove the barriers that are preventing them from using those gifts to contribute. And then we've got to find those closest to the problems that are discovering new and better ways to help people to live up to their potential. Invest in and support those efforts so that we get a whole lot of fast followers competing to empower one another. We think that is what's going to be the transformative thing that happens in society. And so we're looking to build that bottom-up empowerment movement, and we pick the investments that we see that we think have the best potential to do so. And I'm happy to share some of our best examples if that would be helpful.
Yeah, I'd love to hear, just like at a practical level, where are some places that you have some nooks and crannies of society that you have applied your energy and capital, and actually, like, what does that look like? Is it human capital that you're applying? Are you putting dollars into initiatives? Just give us some examples.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you about one of my favorite partners of ours. It's a group called the Phoenix. It's a peer-to-peer addiction recovery movement at this point across the country. And so when we met the Phoenix a number of years ago, probably about 2017, I first met their founder, Scott Strode. Scott was in recovery himself, and he had discovered that his recovery journey really was fueled by a peer network, each of whom's specific recovery journey was an asset they were bringing to the rest of that community. And so they were recovering together. And it was different than the sort of all the clinical approaches out there, the sort of top-down approaches, treating it as a deficiency and a disease, which even differentiated it from, say, Alcoholics Anonymous, which is a great effort that saved many, many lives. But still, people were identifying in their deficiency. And so Scott and the Phoenix were onto something different. They were helping people to take pride in their sobriety and being in recovery together. And so they were doing it through physical fitness. They had a handful of gyms, gym-based programs across the country. They had about 4,000 members when we met them. And so we got engaged to help them think about their organization as an entrepreneurial venture, asking, well, you're onto something big and it's a startup. What would meaningful scale look like? And, they went from 4,000 members in a handful of states through not only our financial capital, which we've helped them significantly there, but through management training, support, bringing in influencer networks that are part of the Stand Together community. We've helped the Phoenix go from 4,000 members in a few states to now they're well over 400,000 members all across the country. And they're on a bit of a hockey stick. They should be at 1 million members of the Phoenix within the next year or two. They've got amazing results. Over 80% of the individuals that are participating in the Phoenix aren't relapsing. But more importantly, their sort of self-efficacy measures, what they report, that their life is transformed as a result of being a part of the Phoenix, is what is really important to us. And so we try to help groups like the Phoenix do what they do, but maybe just to bring this one home, if it were just about helping 1 million people overcome addiction, all we would do is have helped 1 million people, which is a really big deal. But what we're trying to do is change paradigms about people that are experiencing addiction, remove the stigma, and show every single person what those individuals are capable of in their lives. And that should change how each of us interact with our loved ones. Every single one of us, I know I do, have a family member, a friend, someone that we're close to that's struggling with addiction. And what the Phoenix does is it transforms our mindset to the point where even if that person never sets foot in the Phoenix, even if we never experience Phoenix firsthand, if they get to 1 million people, everyone in the country is going to know someone that's been to the Phoenix. And this mindset around addiction recovery and human resilience and strengths-based approaches starts to shine through. And so we want to see that happen over and over and over again to the point where it starts to shape culture.
I love it. So inspiring and such a cool story. Now, just because, we're an investment company and our audience tends to be people who are kind of oriented towards investing, can you help us understand? So did you invest in a company, or what is the theme? Is it a nonprofit and you help fund it, or what does that look like? What's that transaction sometimes look like for you guys?
Yeah. So at Stand Together, we have the ability to be capital type agnostic, I should say. So in this case, we made very large donations to a 501c3 charitable organization, which is what the Phoenix is. But if the appropriate capital vehicle to drive the change we're looking to in the world is a for-profit investment, that's what we do. If it's, whatever the strategy is to help an organization to make a much larger impact, that's the approach we'll take at Stand Together. So, just to get on my soapbox for a second, I think a lot of nonprofits try to build businesses because they're like, well, if I can make a profit, my nonprofit is sustainable. And I always caution against that because I know some of the best business leaders in the world, and I know how hard making money is. And then I know some of the best social entrepreneurs in the world, and I know how hard it is to transform lives and communities. And I always want to say, like, you all both want to be more like the other one. Sometimes too often, the business leaders want to, through their business, drive social change or positive impact. And I think there's obviously, I love your podcast. There's lots of examples of people doing just that, but it's really hard to do both of those things at the same time. And often I tell folks, well, part of my job is to be the bridge between those that are driving just, out of your mind, amazing, blow you away social change on the ground with people who are really good at making money to be through principled business. And when we can connect those two, it's a pretty powerful force. And I think of that as a version of impact investing. Doesn't have to all be done at once, so to speak.
Well, I like what you've done there, Evan. You're kind of blurring the line a little bit as opposed to thinking of it as totally bifurcated. You're recognizing that, hey, just being in a for-profit business, you can have impact, and that's good. And honestly, even being in a nonprofit business, obviously you're thinking about impact all the time, but you also need to be able to run a business, and just keeping them separate sometimes is a good way to think about it. One thing I'm curious about, Evan. So Dan and I are, a couple of dumb real estate investors. So you're doing all this really sophisticated impact you're an amazing organization. And I say that tongue in cheek because obviously real estate intersects with your business. So, you talk about eliminating poverty. I've got to think that there are some real estate connections that relate to homelessness and things like that. Have you seen anything in the real estate space that intersects with the business that you're in?
Yeah, well, it's fun. One of the very first deals I looked at when I came at Stand Together was the Turner Impact Fund. I don't know if you know Bobby Turner, and he's done work with Andre Agassi on a charter school facilities fund, and then some sort of multifamily real estate investments where they were able to use real estate investing to help. And so take the charter school facilities fund. Basically what the Turner Agassi Charter School Facilities Fund did was make pretty significant investments in real estate for the best charter schools in the country. And they would build them like cathedrals of learning. They were just these amazing buildings. And they would only work with the best of the best education models that were delivering really transformative results for students, because those were the ones that were really likely to be able to, first of all, pay the bills on the short-term lease. And then what they would do is they had lease to own deals on those buildings, because those charter schools would have very reliable capital once they were up and running, but they just didn't have that startup capital to buy real estate for themselves before they got going. And so it was a really creative model for real estate investing, solid return for investors, but it was geared toward helping many more students get a great education. So I've seen lots of opportunity. We at Stand Together, we haven't invested in that fund, but it's an example to me of a creative real estate approach. And we've certainly looked at a lot of those deals over the years. None come to mind in particular, but almost every nonprofit we work with, real estate is a thing that they are looking at, and they have the toughest time building capital campaigns to raise enough philanthropic capital to make real estate investments. And I think there's plenty of room for some creative solutions there.
Yeah, it makes a ton of sense. I appreciate the insight there. And I like the creativity that you mentioned, just operators going out and trying to find new ways to kind of thread the needle, solve a problem in a new way. I mean, there's, like Dan said, there's lots of opportunity in the world, lots of need in the world. And it's great to hear that operators are finding new strategies.
Yeah.
Evan, as you think about priorities for the organization today, like looking at the next 12, 18 months, like what are the things that are kind of most important to stand together that you guys are trying to move the needle on right now?
Yeah. Well, we're a national social change organization. And if you look around at the world today, you see the need for what we're doing. As we record this podcast, there's some pretty significant polarization on college campuses related to a significant rise in anti-Semitism in our country and divides over how we interact on those issues. When you look at the state of our communities, more and more people feel stuck than ever before. They just don't see themselves in the future of the country. In fact, a recent poll said just 36% of Americans believe that the American dream is real and something that is in reach for them. And so, I could go on and on about, some research from my friend Todd Rose at Populous that show resentment is at an all-time high. And to me, these are the problems we have to solve. And the way we solve it is to help more people flourish and help more people to contribute in their community. And so we've got to be laser-like focused at Stand Together on creative solutions to these really tough problems. And in doing so, involving as many people as possible in that work.
Awesome. And then one more for you, and then I'll let Andrew take it home. I thought your perspective on not trying to do all things, but if you're going to be a business leader, be a business leader. If you're going to be a social entrepreneur, be a social entrepreneur. I thought that was interesting and challenging because we do try, like we think a lot about running a business and the impact that we're having on the communities that we are investing in. So how would you, from your collective experience of interacting with entrepreneurs and business leaders, how would you advise someone like us who says, yeah, we're trying to make money, like make no mistake about it, we want to make a buck, but we actually really care about how we go about that and we don't want to be blind and ruthless. So I don't know, how would you advise us?
Now, don't get me wrong. I was trying to critique sometimes where people try to create businesses that sort of are fundamentally double bottom line businesses, and they're sort of working against themselves all the time. I think that principled business that makes a positive impact on the communities and society around them is a really critical thing in society in general. And so I think what you're trying to do is extremely, extremely important and an example to so many. So let me start by saying, first of all, principled business is creating value for everyone around us, which is to say, as long as a business is not taking shortcuts to make their capital, to make their profits, right? They're not using their customers, they're not using their community or the environment around them. They're not taking shortcuts through government regulatory capture or subsidies or rent seeking of any other kind from government. When a business creates value for customers, it is creating value in society. And so the first sort of tent pole here for me is our businesses seeking what I would call, and what Charles Koch has written a book on, good profit, right? Profit by creating value for customers. Unfortunately, too many businesses go the route of seeking, coercive government subsidies or sort of using people as a means to an end in their work, and therefore sort of violate that standard. But then from there, the next sort of rung out is, well, start with the actual comparative advantages of the business. So if the business is particularly good at something, using what it's good at to improve the community is just a natural fit. Too many businesses try to create social impact arms that have nothing to do with the capabilities and core strengths of the business. And I think that's a mistake because it's too hard. You're acting outside of your capabilities, what you're actually good at. And so if you're a great real estate investment firm, the opportunity is, well, how can real estate be leveraged for good? And then from there, capital, right, sort of surplus capital that can be put to use to drive social change can be invested much more smartly into efforts that can drive positive impact outside the organization. So my advice is not to avoid trying to do good as a business. I think that's a really important thing for businesses to do. It's just to be focused and strategic about it, which I am quite certain you guys are.
Yeah, super helpful. I sure hope so. But I think what I'm hearing is it's good to take this approach of wanting to do good profit, like you said, but also stay in your lane. Like, not try to be all things to all people. So I think that's great. Cool. Well, I'm going to lead us through the lightning round. Fascinating discussion. Learned a ton about how you think about impact. Now I just want to learn a little bit about you. So first of all, what would you say is your biggest win? It could be personal, professional, whichever direction you want to go.
Oh man, convincing my wife, Sarah, love of my life, to marry me is most certainly my biggest win. She's a former Marine Corps officer and then Wharton MBA, and she does a lot of this sort of impact investing type stuff in her free time now. She's the mom of my 3 amazing boys, and so that's certainly my biggest win, was somehow convincing her to marry me and do life together.
That's awesome. I love it. She sounds great. What would you say is your favorite movie?
Hands down, it's A Few Good Men. I'm a fan of all things Sorkin, but it's been my favorite movie for some time. And I think, my favorite movies are always movies that at the end of the movie, you're still not sure what you think. And I've watched A Few Good Men 100 times, and, I'm still morally conflicted about the main characters of that movie. And so I think that's great writing and a great movie.
Wow. Interesting filter for movies there. What would you say is your favorite food?
So I'm a keto guy, so I eat basically steak and red meat for half my meals these days. So I'm gonna go ahead with the filet mignon as my favorite food, I guess.
Oh, delicious.
Yeah.
What's the current way in which you're trying to grow right now, either personally or professionally, your current growth edge?
Yeah. So everything in my world is about what are the ideas that drive human flourishing. And so I'm trying to really step back more instead of solving the problems of today, but to learn a whole lot more and to go into problem solving with a whole lot more humility. So for the first time since I think my undergrad days, I'm spending a significant amount of my time reading philosophers and authors and sort of social commentators. I'm right now, you had a woman on your podcast just a little bit ago who was quoting Andy Crouch. I happen to be right in the middle of one of Andy Crouch's books. I think he's really sharp on this stuff. So I'm just trying to learn from other people who are approaching similar problems, trying to learn from people who disagree with me on these things, and steel man versus straw man their arguments more often. And then I find I'm actually learning a whole lot from how they think about it when I do that.
Nice. Super helpful. Any particular content you'd recommend to our listeners, podcasts, books, anything along those lines? You mentioned Andy Crouch, but what else?
Yeah, no, I do love Andy Crouch, and the talk, it was Lisa, I think, that you had on your podcast, the talk that she was referencing about going from impact to influence and the sort of physics definition of impact. I think that's an important concept. I know he's writing a book on it right now, but on the Praxis website, he's a leader at an organization called Praxis, which I would take a look at their stuff. They're awesome. And that talk is on their website. I certainly would recommend folks go to Stand Together, standtogether.org. We do some pretty incredible storytelling, I think, on sort of just stories of transformation and social entrepreneurship and human flourishing there. But as far as what I'm consuming, I love listening to Ezra Klein's podcast. I disagree with Ezra Klein on pretty much everything, but I think he's having interesting conversations on a weekly basis. A similar type of content is a guy I've had a chance to get to know, Tyler Cowen, who has a podcast called Conversations with Tyler, and he blogs at The Marginal Revolution. He's with the Mercatus Center at George Mason University. Other than that, I've been reading some Dick Cornell. He wrote in the 1960s through, the maybe early 2000s. He passed away in the early 2000s on the American idea, but applying it to communities and to our interpersonal interactions rather than the role of government. He's a pretty interesting guy. So yeah, those are just a few things I've been working through lately.
Yeah, just a few.
That sounds like that's the most impressive list anyone's rattled off in terms of.
Oh, come on.
Yeah, that's really good. That's great stuff. Cool. So if folks want to connect with you, it sounds like standtogether.org. Any other way you'd recommend folks kind of get in touch with you if they want to follow up on the conversation?
Tell them to find me on LinkedIn. Evan Feinberg with Stand Together on LinkedIn, and would love to connect with anyone and everyone.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for being on the show, Evan. I really enjoyed the discussion. I learned a ton. I like how you think about dealing with this, huge issue, poverty and changing mindsets and removing the stigma, things like addiction. and really bringing the person up. I just get this sense that you're about elevating people. And that was really impactful to me. Hopefully that was impactful to our listeners. And I know the one thing I'm taking away is this concept of staying in your lane. I think that was really good, and ton of wisdom there in terms of not trying to be all things to all people. Because again, there's a million things you could be doing at your organization. You guys are focusing on the things you do well. And just a reminder to our listeners and to us as operators to just focus on what we do well. So thank you, Evan, for being on the show.
Yeah, you bet. It was so great to be with you.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of the Real Returns Podcast. We hope that you learned something new about how you can invest to make a lasting impact on those around you. Please be sure to subscribe to our show wherever you listen to your podcasts, leave us a review, and share about us on social media. We hope you will join us for our next episode, where we will be continuing the conversation around impactful real estate investing.